I'm Joshua Carroll. I'm a product manager focused on the Streamlit Open Source library. I'm going to be talking about some today. And a little fun fact, here's a piece of art that I worked on at Burning Man this year in the process of being set on fire. So what I'm going to talk through is basically why is it important to think about the user interface for your applications as you're building them, and kind of the key scenarios that we're thinking about for this talk. What are some of the commonly used tools and workflows that people use to build user interfaces that we see today, particularly focused on generative AI applications? I'm going to do a little bit of a deep dive on building generative AI applications with Streamlit, and then do a demo and do some live coding of that. And I'll just say this talk is definitely focused on, particularly if you are a Python developer or another backend developer yourself who is not as familiar with React, JavaScript, or kind of front-end frameworks, or doing full-stack applications, or you want to build without having to think through that in terms of the stage of application development that you're at, then I think this talk is particularly for you, and that's sort of what we're thinking about here. If you already are super fluent in JavaScript or kind of React is the first tool that you'd pick up, then honestly, Streamlit is probably not the tool for you. And so I'll just get that out of the way out front. So why are we talking about this? Why particularly is user interface important here? So particularly thinking about being able to iterate really fast during development and interact with the application that you're building, as well as get immediate feedback from your team, peers, people that you're interested in getting feedback from, and being able to share it really easily. And also kind of thinking immediately about what's the demo. If you're thinking about launching a full product, kind of being able to interact as though it was sort of a full product immediately as you're building, or at least to have something that you can share. And maybe if it's an internal application, maybe something that you're building for your team, in a work context, even just being able to kind of share that in a way that immediately someone can kind of interact and grok what it is that you're building. So what are some of the kind of paths that we see around this, particularly for generative AI applications? So the way that a lot of people get started is just interacting with the command line. Obviously, with LLMs, a lot of things are around text, and so text works really nicely in the command line. We also see like notebooks as a style that a lot of cookbook kind of examples and courses, like if you pick up sort of the deep learning course on LLM apps or something like that, it kind of walks you through a notebook interface. I think, it's definitely a great place to start, but it gets hard to share. You can really only share kind of videos, or if someone is a developer that can kind of run the application themselves, then they could launch it. But it's harder to kind of share with a wider team or someone who's less technical. Here's an example using panel and a dashboard. We see React templates as another approach. That particularly if you're trying to build some kind of chat application or another application that is sort of in a cookie cutter style. And again, if you're already familiar with React, or you want to, or another front-end framework and you want to go in that style, then that can work really well. But I think the challenge with that is that you're immediately, again, kind of thinking about it as a full stack application. You're having to get deeper into the front-end code. Whereas if you're just sort of prototyping or getting started in particular, you might be able to move faster without having to do that. As we just saw, we're seeing more and more about using GPTs or LLMs to actually generate the applications. OpenAI kind of had their developer day a few weeks ago, which I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with, where they introduced GPTs and actually kind of had this full workflow of like having a conversational interface that produces a polished app and being able to share and everything like that. I think this is really compelling and interesting. Obviously, yeah, there's a bunch of startups in this space, and I think we'll continue to see the capabilities improve. With this style. I think one challenge that I've seen with it today is that the debugging and kind of iterating experience can still be a bit challenging, where you're either having to ask the LLM to do it, or you need to be able to understand the code enough yourself to be able to edit it. So again, if you're not a full stack developer, you're not trying to think in that style, I think that can kind of slow you down. But I am really excited about that, and I think we'll continue to see this improve. And then finally, and kind of where I'm going to be focusing the rest of this talk, is thinking about just using a Python toolkit. If you're already coding in Python, if you want to be able to use kind of the latest AI tools like your LangChain or Llama Index or Stable Diffusion, any of these other kind of tools that already have great Python tooling around them, just being able to kind of stay in Python. And there's a bunch of tools that work great for this. I think Gradio and Streamlit are probably two of the most popular ones. But there are a bunch of others as well. And I think they're all great tools for different use cases. and also some newer ones that are kind of more focused on chat interfaces and kind of LLMs like Fast Chat and Chainlit. But I'm going to talk a little bit about Streamlit and kind of particularly, and I work on Streamlit, so obviously I'm biased, but some of the things that makes it great and like use cases that it's particularly well suited for. So what is Streamlit? Why is it interesting? And what makes it different from other frameworks? I'm going to keep an eye on my time here. So number one, it really embraces Python scripting. So you can kind of either take an existing Python script that's kind of doing what you want to do or that command line style of application and very rapidly turn it into a web application without having to do a lot of refactoring, or just build it that way from the get-go and not have to be thinking about, you're kind of like think about the layout, think about HTML or kind of callbacks or the sort of reactive style where it's sort of a full stack application, even if it's all in Python. But you can really just sort of embrace scripting. Treating widgets as variables. So you can kind of see the example here where you've got a slider and it's just returning a variable that then you can kind of interact with, do other kinds of calculations, whatever you want. And I'll show some more examples of that in the live coding. But it also allows you to reuse data and computation with caching primitives and something called session state that I'll show, so that you're not having to kind of, repeat that computation whenever input changes. And what this provides is this really amazing kind of fast prototyping flow or really fast iteration flow, even for adding new features as well, where you can get started coding very quickly. You can iterate super rapidly. And then you can also kind of deploy and share whatever you built very, very quickly. So there's very low friction with kind of doing that, playing around, seeing what works and what doesn't, and kind of having this seamless experience of the backend logic as well as the UI all kind of being together, which obviously, if you're trying to build like a fuller application, at some point that may become a problem. But when you're getting started, it allows you to move very quickly and iterate like that. So yeah, I think Streamlit is particularly good in the way that it provides a really nice balance between speed of development, flexibility, and being able to really kind of still build whatever sort of UI you want with a lot of flexibility, and having a lot of UI primitives and components that you can also insert into your app really easily. So I've got an example here. Where we see a chat interface as well as a plot, and being able to write that with just a few lines of code. Again, you're working entirely within Python. So if you're familiar, you're not having to kind of switch between different languages. And if you're already sort of savvy in Python, then it's very natural and easy to get started. That also means that it's really easily integrated with pretty much any kind of Python framework or other existing library, whether it's for ML or LLMs or something else. And it's also really transferable. So, we're talking here about demo, like kind of building demo applications and chat interfaces, but there's also a lot of great tools for like building, some kind of ML evaluation tool, or if you need to build an annotation tool for your team to use, or some kind of observability thing or something like that. You can really, like, Streamlit is sort of the Swiss Army knife that you can use to build a whole bunch of stuff. And I've certainly found in my usage and hear a lot from users that kind of once you sort of get it, it can become something that you turn to solve a lot of quick problems and build applications that, where you might have been interacting with a script or kind of doing something in a notebook that takes longer. And we also have a huge ecosystem and community. So there's more than 150,000 developers that use Streamlit every month. And we have a super active forum. There's a huge component library, app gallery, lots of examples. There's a kind of a fun side effect of this that GPT is really good at writing Streamlit apps. And sometimes we'll write Streamlit apps even if you don't tell it to write Streamlit, just because there's so much content out there, which also, again, if you're using a Copilot or something like that, it makes it a very effective tool to get started. And I think the scripting style also is works very naturally with GPT because it's kind of, generating code piece by piece, which means that if your app is not trying to have a bunch of callbacks and kind of a more complex structure, it can write it really easily. So just to show a couple of examples of applications that people have built in the wild with Streamlit that were kind of focused on AI. So this is one that's actually been around for a little while called Sigil UI, which is one of the first UIs for Stable Diffusion that was kind of popular and gives you a lot of customizability in terms of how you interact with it. This actually just came out last week from the Llama Index team and was getting a bunch of traction called RAGS for Retrieval Augmented Generation, which is sort of an open alternative to OpenAI's GPTs, built entirely with Streamlit and Llama Index and very easy to kind of run yourself with any LLM. And you can kind of do the chat style interaction to build the app and then interact with it in the same app. This was a fun one from Twilio from Halloween that is like a very simple UI to generate like a prank phone call to one of your friends that then Twilio will generate it for you and send it. Microsoft put this out a month or so ago, I think. basically a teaching assistant targeted for in India. That's like a co-pilot. But they actually built the UI for it in Streamlit. This was a really fun one. The day that Llama 2 came out, Replicate and Anderson Horowitz put out a website that was like llama2.ai that was like the first kind of way to interact with Llama 2. And they used Streamlit to build the interface that they shared that with. I think they ended up rebuilding it as a full stack app a little bit later, but it was like a really fast way for them to get started. A cool one from UC Berkeley from a few weeks ago that's like a code generation tool for building LLM applications and kind of building guardrails into the app based on the prompt. And finally, the LangChain team has put out a bunch of these, including like their tutor application, some of the other tools for like RAG optimization, things like that, where they build Streamlit apps and share them because they find that it's like a really easy way for them to build the UI for the kinds of functionality that they want to build. So you can see some more examples on our hub, streamlit.io/generative AI. All right, so with that, I'm going to jump into a demo and do a little bit of live coding here. Hopefully the coding gods will be on my side. So I'm going to do this demo in GitHub Codespaces, which we found has been incredibly useful as GitHub has kind of continued to improve to be able to interact very quickly in a browser and do coding and everything in a VS Code style interface. And if you're interested in doing this yourself, sorry, that's probably a little bit small. We actually integrated Codespaces into our Streamlit community cloud on share.streamlit.io recently. So if you log in, you'll get to a screen like this, and you can do new app and then create a new app with GitHub Codespaces and type in your thing and hit create. And in just a second, it's going to pop up a screen that'll let me launch a Codespace. I'm not going to go through that because it'll take a couple of minutes to load, but I'll jump to one that I pre-set up just by copying in some of the files and setting up some of my secrets so that I'm not leaking my OpenAI keys to all of you. And so this is a super basic chat application, and I'll walk through what this application is doing, and then I'll build a couple of features on top of it, just to show how easy it is to kind of iterate and add. And so let's see if I can zoom in on this really. Actually, let's look at the app first. So I've got this very simple, I've kind of replicated ChatGPT in 30 lines of code, our hello world example that everyone builds. And I can say, ask it for a shark joke. I really like the shark jokes. It actually has a pretty good range of them. Yeah, I haven't gotten this one before. Why did the shark go to counseling? Because he had a lot of financial problems. A little bit of an awkward pun, but we'll take it. And so how's this working? So basically, just to show that kind of like embrace scripting style. So this application, again, it's about 30 lines of code. We're just using the OpenAI SDK directly. So we can write a title. We're storing the message history in session state. So we've got just a list of these messages in the OpenAI dictionary style. For each message that's in state, each time the app runs, we're writing all the chat messages to the screen, the content of those messages using st.chatMessage. And then we're drawing a chat input, your input box at the bottom. And whenever a new input comes in from the user, we're taking that, we're writing it to the screen again, and we are calling OpenAI with the set of messages that we have and streaming back that response to see the application that we got. And doing a little bit of magic here or not magic, but a little bit of complex code to stream the response back and kind of keep a running string with each token being added and kind of redraw it each time. So that's our application here. And then let's see, what kind of feature do I want to build for this? So, if you've played around with LLMs and kind of done any application building, one of the first things, or one of the easiest sort of knobs to tweak is the temperature on the LLM, which is, how random the response is that you want to get. If you set the temperature really low, then you're going to get the same response every time. If you set it higher, you're going to start kind of getting gibberish. So what would it look like to add temperature to this app? And actually, before I do that, since we're going to be running this a few times, I'm going to start actually just by adding a button to clear the chat history. So let's do here in the init setup, the init here where we reset the conversation history. I'm going to add a button to the if block there. And now, if I rerun this, got here in my sidebar, this chat history, which I can clear that, and we're back to where we started. So that was pretty easy. That's going to make the rest of this demo go a little bit more easily. Okay, so we were talking about adding a temperature slider. So again, we're still very much in a scripting style. We're not having to think about callbacks or anything like that. I can just declare my temperature variable, add in the sidebar a slider, tell it this is going to be temperature, and then what the min and max are, and the step. And then in the call to the LLM, I just pass that variable in, and that's literally all that I had to do. Now I've got my temperature slider here. I can move that around. And then, let's see. I think the most demonstrable way to see that this is changing is by setting it really high and getting gibberish. So I'm going to do that, although you might not do this in an actual user, a real user app. Oh, swallowed leader. Okay, that's a little bit more controversial. I don't know if the LLM is advocating violence here. I certainly wouldn't, but that's the kind of thing that you get when you set it a little bit higher. So there's that. Okay, let's add something a little bit more interesting. So we see the kind of one of the next applications that a lot of times you'll see, like an agent example or something like that, is giving it a file and saying like, the user's provided some input in a file or something like that. I want to ask questions over it or do something like that. So I can build something like that pretty easily with a file uploader. So I'm just going to add my context file here as the file uploader. I'm going to tell it that it will accept type of markdown and text. And for this, I'm not going to accept multiple files. And that should do it. So I've got my little file uploader here. Let's see. It is, I think, gonna. So I've got the Streamlit README here prepared as a very easy markdown file. So I can upload that, and now it's got the file. So that was one line of code to add this. And I'm going to cheat here and copy a couple of lines from my fancy app just for the sake of time. So then I can just add basically 4 more lines of code to handle that in the prompts. Okay, so what did I do here? So if the user has uploaded a context file, I'm going to read the contents of the file in as text. I'm going to create a new message and do a little bit of light prompt engineering here, where I say the user provided the following document for context. Please refer to the document in your response, and paste that context in there. And then I'm going to append that to the set of messages that I'm passing to the LLM as a system message, so it has that information. So if I've done this correctly, which I think I have, I should be able to now, we still got our file here, so it's got the README file to say what is the context about. And it's gotten the file, it's passed it in, and the LLM now has access to that, so it can tell me that it's got an introduction to Streamlit, a Python library that allows you to quickly create and share interactive data applications. Okay, so we added a couple of features here. Now, what's the sharing experience like? So if I built this through Community Cloud using that kind of getting started experience that I showed before, then it also deployed this to Streamlit's public cloud at the same time. That was kind of happening in parallel. So I've actually got the application posted here on ai/dev/demo1.streamlit.app. So if you want to go in and make use of my API key here for a few minutes before I take this app down, you can go on your phone and do that. If you're watching this recording later, I've probably taken this down, so this is not going to work for you. I'm sorry. And so this is all synced to Git. So I should be able to just commit my change here. Tell it added some features. And sync that up. And what I will hopefully see, if everything is in my favor, is that it's going to reload my app. And there you go. Now on the live app, if you loaded it up, you should be able to take a look. I've got those features that I just added. I can, I'll just repeat the same demo here. what is context impact? And yeah, my changes were pushed to the internet, and the app is now live, and I could keep iterating, adding new features. I could share this with my friend. Let's see, I think this app is public. Yeah, should have checked that before. And, immediately be getting feedback, kind of interacting. And again, if I'm working with a business stakeholder or someone else, they're immediately able to try this out as well and see what I built and give me feedback about it and do that really fast iteration loop. So yeah, I think that's what I had to share, and we're looking all right on time. So I think I can take questions or comments for a few minutes. I think using like GitHub Copilot will work great. Again, just using so if you're using a Copilot, I think that's the easiest one that I would recommend. I haven't played around with others that are built on Llama 2 or other kinds of things like that. So I would definitely recommend that one. If you have a ChatGPT, is it the Pro? So whatever the thing is that lets you use GPTs, a colleague of ours who wrote a book about Streamlit has built a GPT where it has access to the whole book, so you can ask kind of more detailed questions that way, and it will draw context from the book. I don't know the link to that handy, but we can maybe post it afterwards. Yeah, so those are two that I would recommend. Yeah, so I launched this ahead of time, but basically when you pip install Streamlit, it installs your Streamlit command line tool, and the main thing that's used for is the Streamlit run. So when this code space launches, and you get this by default if you create a code space through our tool, and obviously you can do the same thing locally, you just call Streamlit run hello.py, and so that's what launched here that kicked it off. This is watching the file here, so I think I hit the always rerun button when I kick this off, which is like you hit A after you launch it. So whenever I'm saving the file, it's trying to rerun this, and then when I'm interacting with it, yeah. So basically, Streamlit has this like run the script from top to bottom every time there's a user change pattern. So that's kind of what's happening with this. Is yeah, it's sort of running this from top to bottom, which is why we're doing this thing where this is probably a little bit hard to see. For example, why we need to iterate each time. Sorry, this is a pain. Basically, each time the app runs, we're redrawing the chat messages because it's doing that top to bottom thing. I was thinking about that actually like 20 minutes ago, because I was like, this would have been a much cooler demo if I was using GitHub Copilot and asking it to build these features for me. So that's a self note for next time I give this presentation. I'm actually not sure if CodeSpace, it's whatever GitHub Codespaces provides. I would guess if you have like an account that has it set up that it would, but I haven't tried it, and maybe someone else here has and knows. But it's basically whatever GitHub Codespaces provides. There's nothing special that we're doing. I see a couple people nodding, so I'm guessing that it's yes. So I think what I would say is, again, because Streamlit is an open source tool that you can run yourself, you can run it locally, you can run it in your own cloud environment beyond just our hosted cloud. And obviously I showed kind of the hosted cloud example here, where if you want to host a public app or something like that, it's very easy to do. But it's just a Python library. It's totally open source. So you can run it in your own infrastructure if you had sensitive data that you needed to run over, or for some reason didn't want to be kind of sending queries back and forth over the public internet or rely on OpenAI. It's a great tool to kind of build your AI for your application without needing to do that. I think this RAGS example, let's see if I can find it, is a great use case for this that the Llama Index team put out last week, where they replicated kind of this GPT style experience. But this is again just another open source library. It's just another kind of public repo on GitHub that you can launch with Streamlit Run in the same way. So you can run this yourself to kind of replicate GPTs, to build whatever kind of RAG pipeline you want to use on your own infrastructure, locally, anything like that. And for example, like if you wanted to swap this app out to use, say, LangChain with Llama 2 or something like that instead of OpenAI and run it locally, it would be very straightforward for you to do that. You're not dependent on any other kind of web infrastructure, anything that's put out by OpenAI or anything like that. So I think that flexibility and the ability to kind of run on your own infrastructure, customize it however you want, use whatever model you want, and kind of have the full Python ecosystem at your fingertips to do that is what I think makes it really powerful. I would say, honestly, the auth support in Streamlit is not the best right now. And it's something that we do get a lot of feedback from users about. So it is definitely possible to build authentication into your app. And so, for example, I just went to streamlit.io/components, which is our kind of custom component library of components that were built mostly by the community. So we have an authentication tab here, and you can see there are a few examples of using like Keycloak. I think there's some others that maybe aren't here of like, integrating with Google Auth or something like that. So it is certainly possible to build, and people have built things on top of Streamlit that makes that easy to do. But I would say it's not as good as we would like it to be. And that's actually something that I'm personally kind of passionate about and working on. So I'm really hoping that we'll make progress on that in the coming months and make that story better, because it's a very common request. Yeah.